Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today, I am thrilled to have with me Marci Toler. Marci is a part of the Voice of Influence team, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her today. She is a retired officer for the United States Army, Lieutenant Colonel, and holds the Human Resource Manager function area, specializing in organizational team development, operations, strategic planning. She was awarded the Bronze Star. I mean, she's done a lot of things. I'm so excited for you to meet Marci Toler. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me. It feels a little odd to be on this side.
Odd to be on this side.
Yeah, I'm usually the one, leading a conversation. So it's a different experience.
You do lead a lot of conversations. So do you mind sharing just kind of, let's start with what do you do, Marci? What do you do?
Well, after I retired from the Army, I really wanted to kind of find my place in business. I have a master's, an MBA, and then I have a master's in strategic studies. So I thought I should probably put those to use. So I really focused on my operations experience and my leadership training within the Army. So with the Voice of Influence, I've been fortunate enough to be able to work and serve with you guys as the lead instructor, but I often like to call it the lead facilitator for contracts with the government on their leadership development programs. Outside of that, I work with a lot of different companies, building their operations, understanding the vision and connecting the dots to the actual execution and working through all of that process in the middle.
Operations and putting things into action, leadership, these seem to be some of the main themes for you.
I wouldn't say that I'm a super visionary person, but I can clarify someone's vision. I can make it more concrete. I can get it into an actionable item and catch hold of it and then accelerate the teams towards that vision.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that a lot. So, and you also mentioned that you're the lead instructor for a couple of programs that are actually within the umbrella of the Army. And so with our program. And so I I am so glad that you're able to be in that position because number one, you have so much experience and knowledge about what the people that are going through these programs are experiencing, but then also that ability to guide the conversation and guide the development of the leader. So what is the difference in your mind between being a lead instructor versus a facilitator?
Yeah, I think I probably have like the old school definition or thought in my head, right? Somebody that's in front of the room with a bunch of PowerPoints and like going through the PowerPoint and distilling knowledge. Like you take notes and get the questions right on the test.
For an
And
instructor.
from an instructor, right? Like that's the image that I hold of an instructor. And that's really not what we're trying to do. We're really trying, and one, that's really not leadership or how you can teach leadership. Leadership is a very personal endeavor. And so what I really want to do and what we're trying to do is to be very collaborative and have people think about what is their best leadership experience. Who do they want to be as a leader? What legacy and impact do they want to have? And what skills do they need to grow to be able to be that type of leader?
Yeah.
So it's a very, collaborative exchange. And for sure, there are certain topics that are vitally important to the conversation, but it's not taking a test and getting an A, right? It's taking the information, assimilating it, sitting with it. I often tell the people in our cohorts, I'm like, this is a great opportunity to blame the program and go try something. Like if you're scared to take the risk, just tell them that you have to do it for this program and take the risk and see what happens. Like it's so low risk in that case. Um, and that gives them a comfort of like, oh, I can do that. It's not a win or lose proposition then.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the conversations that you lead and guide are how you really seem to care about the other, like about other people processing for themselves, making decisions for themselves, not just being told what it means to be a leader, like you were saying as an instructor, but helping them to discover for themselves their own, well, what you end up calling leadership philosophy.
Mm-hmm. I do.
So, what is a leadership philosophy, and why do you think that's so important for leaders to develop?
Um, so what is it? It's generally a statement or a story that you can easily share about who you are as a leader, what your teams should expect, what you need from your teams, how that relationship is going to work. Um, I think I shared this with you. I was recently reading an article from Harvard Business Review that said, we as humans, we learn through storytelling. And if you think about it, we probably all remember these stories that our parents told us about ourselves as kids, or those are the things, whether we make up a story around something or we've heard a story around it, those are the things that we emotionally connect to. And so a leadership philosophy is really the story of your identity as a leader.
The story of your identity as a leader. Could you give us an example?
Yeah, I'm happy to share mine. And over the years, I've like narrowed it down to just two words, but it's also calling forward for me.
Mm.
So my leadership philosophy is that leadership is a privilege and a responsibility. So it reminds me that I am so lucky to be granted the opportunity to influence, to lead, to have a voice, to to be in the midst of change. Um, and I have a responsibility, when I was in the combat zone, to the safety of my soldiers, to not sending them out on a frivolous mission, to their families at home, to everybody that touched their lives. Those really are people with families and communities. And I promised myself that every one of my soldiers would have a good story, that they could be the grandparent that could put their grandchild on their knee and go, back in the day when I was in the war, this is the story. Um, and so that's that responsibility. And of course, I have a responsibility to the ethics and the mission and the overall culture of what we're trying to do. And I have a responsibility to ensure that the organization is sustainable within that. And so that means I have responsibility for discipline and standards and all of those things. But those two words kind of highlight what drives me and motivates me. And then it kind of goes to a mission specific philosophy. So during one of my command tenures, the mission of the organization was to do it better, faster, cheaper. And I distilled that to every soldier. And they knew that if they could come back and justify to me why they thought it was better, faster, cheaper to the taxpayer, faster delivered to the warfighter, a better process. I may not necessarily agree with what they did. I may have done it differently, but I had their back because they were executing my intent.
Mm. Mm. So many things here. I have so many different questions. This is what I love about this conversation, Marci, because I know that so I know you pretty well, but I don't know everything about you. So I have so many questions. You mentioned also that you wanted the soldiers to be able to have a good story. And I'm so curious, how do you how do you try to make that happen? What is the responsibility there for you?
Yeah. Um, well, I had a very large battalion, so I commanded 3,000 plus soldiers and 600 and some contractors, and I actually even had a platoon of sailors that I commanded. So it was a very diverse and big organization. Um, but I was always looking for opportunities to grow soldiers, opportunities to, you know, we all had to, perimeter security was a given. You obviously have to defend the space that you're in. Um, but that doesn't mean that that's your only job, right? So we really made sure that we rotated that responsibility and everybody had that responsibility. It wasn't just, oh, I went to Iraq and I pulled perimeter security. Like, no. uh, and we were logisticians. So our job was, I describe it as a Walmart distribution center in the middle of Iraq. And we were getting in large bulk supplies and breaking them down for onward movement for the end user, the end warfighter. So we put a person with that. You know, it wasn't just that we were moving this many tons of um, toilet paper. You know, we were like making sure that those guys in the far northern cab had a comfort of home. We would make sure that they had everything they need to celebrate Christmas. Just those really meaningful things of remembering who we served.
Hmm.
Uh, and then we also really tried to build a relationship with our local population and show them a different way. You know, like not make their way wrong at all, but like, okay, you can show us this and we will show you this, and let's figure out the best way to do it. And so it's really just thinking about how can I make this task more meaningful.
Hmm. Think that that's one of the reasons why you and I connect so much on, like, this is one of our big connection points. Like, I care so much about people realizing the meaning of the work that they do, and you do too. And you um you use the word intent a lot, and you used it in the context just a little bit ago about better, faster, cheaper. If soldiers can bring can say that that's what it is, at least they're executing your intent, even if you don't agree with them. What does it mean to execute intent? Why is intent so important to you?
I don't think we always have time in a leadership role to make sure that everyone understands what we're trying to say at any given time.
Mm.
We're moving super quickly. We can get stressed. We are barking, you know, whether it's in uniform or out, you're barking commands, you're barking tasks, you're just moving quickly. Um, but if you've set early through your leadership philosophy, through your mission intent, through your vision, what you're trying to accomplish, and you have spent the time early to get everyone enrolled in this vision and clear, then one, when you're running short, there's some grace. Two, you have confidence that we're all in the same boat, going the same direction, trying to accomplish the same mission. And that's what moves an organization forward. You can't have everybody running different. Like it's hard enough when you have a good solid vision and intent to keep everybody moving forward. When it's unclear, it's just chaos and that just doesn't work.
Mm. Yeah. Oh my goodness, so true. And I think that what you said about doing it early. Like it's like an investment. It's
Mhm.
investing the time and energy early to get clear, to know what you're trying to say, to be able to say it and get people on board before moving forward. I think that's really it's I think it's sometimes, like you said, you get in the middle of it, things are going fast, you don't always have time to explain everything, but if they understand where you're headed, they can at least try to move in that direction.
I think also with your intent, so it's the big vision, right?
Mm,
And then you try something and you're like, well, that didn't work. And
yeah.
it's not a failure. It's just like, well, that didn't work. So it doesn't mean where I'm headed is wrong. It doesn't change course. It doesn't derail the organization. It's just that didn't work.
Yeah.
Let's try something else.
Yeah. And that's a key point too. I think it's harder for younger people, I think, and maybe some older people, I don't know. But it does seem like they're like high achievers. Why don't we say that? People who are smart, people who got A's in school or were always shooting for those A's in school often think like they can often still carry that into their work experience and bring that need to be perfect or to find perfection. And so to find out that something didn't work isn't just it didn't work. It feels more like a failure. How do you help people to reframe that for themselves?
Yeah, it seems much harder when people have great success being an achiever, right? The more success that you
Yeah.
have in that role, the more you want to hang on to that. And I fall into that as well, where I get a lot of my personal motivation externally, not necessarily internally. But it's it's for me, how I do it is really trying to get them to buy into the bigger picture. And and then the hard conversations, right? Like sometimes they're just not fun. Like nobody wants to hear, um, hey, it's fine. Like when you're a high achiever, nobody wants to hear it's going to be okay. That just isn't helpful. So it's really communicating or knowing that person to say, okay, let's break down what didn't work. Oh, see, it was this thing. And did you really have control over it? Okay, if you had control over it, well, maybe make a different decision next time. Like, oh, would you do that again? Or would you be like, oh, I learned that lesson?
Mm,
But again, it's investing in people and
mm,
not just moving past them. I think one of the things that I did not know early on in my career that I'm much more aware of is how nimble and flexible a leader really needs to be. Um,
mm,
we are leading and influencing, in my case, over 1,000 people. And thank goodness I had commanders in place. So I had 15 commanders, and I'm really just working with that group. Um, but anytime I was on base and walking around, I was still influencing people because they knew there goes the colonel, right? So, but it's an individual investment and uh, knowing, and sometimes for me, it's just a gut reaction. It's like, I think this is important to this person. Let me confirm it. Like, it's not like, hey, what's important to you? Because sometimes people can't actually answer that or feel uncomfortable. They want to give you the right answer, and
mm,
that serves no one.
mm,
But I think early in my career, I was much more like, this is what a lieutenant needs to look like, and this is who I'm going to be. Um, and maybe every lieutenant goes through that, I hope. Uh, that's why you have a wise NCO with your as a platoon sergeant that kind of rounds those rough edges for you. And I
mm,
think every senior leader really needs that safe collaborative space. Um, it's pretty lonely, it's lonely at the top. You're responsible for a lot of decisions. And and I don't think it can necessarily be within your organization. I think it has to be a place where you have a safe place that safe place isn't afraid to hold the candle and hold you accountable when you need to be held accountable, isn't afraid to ask the hard questions, but you know that they're coming at it from a place of making you better, not a place of competition.
Yeah. Did you have that?
I did. I had, I mean, the good thing about the Army structure is that I had mentors still in the Army, not in my command. So I would often, in the Army situation, the Army is kind of like this big family where you're in close proximity, so you have a very intense relationship. And then we PCS and move on, and we don't see each other. And then 5 years later, like we just pick it right up. It's a very cultural thing. But so I had mentors come and go, but I had the right mentors when I needed them. And so I think also just taking advantage of those around you is a key thing for your own personal development and support.
How did you take advantage of the people around you? How did you capitalize or leverage, or I guess, was it asking for help? Was it, what was it?
I mean, for sure, sometimes I would ask for help, but remember, I'm that high achiever, so let's
You don't
not
need a whole
really.
lot of help, right?
But I just wanted to be in the room. So oftentimes, there's that saying of, make a place at the table. And that wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted to be in the room to hear the conversations, to understand what goes into the decision making. And then honestly, I would try to take that back and prepare my team to be leaning forward and not being reactive. That's also kind of where I personally would much rather lean forward. And
describe what you mean by that.
Yeah, anticipating, like, we know a change is coming. We know something is happening. Let's be part of the conversation to shape it, as opposed to being told what it's going to be. I would much rather be in the conversation. And that doesn't mean I have to be at the table. That means I know who's at the table, so I can have conversations with them and influence them to take it to the table. Right? But I have to be in the room to hear what's happening. Or I have to have that conversation with the people that are in the room, right? Like it's a network of people in influence. I don't necessarily like just receiving something, right? Like that's just not comfortable to me. I want to help shape how it goes. And so that's always my question is, well, if you hand me this thing, what's your intent? Because I really want to make sure that I understand this thing that you've handed to me matches your intent before I start executing it.
Has that ever annoyed people?
Oh, yeah. Just don't do it. And I'm sure there are times, and that's not true. When I have a bank of trust with someone, I mean, to this day, several people would call me right now today and say, pack your stuff, we got to go. Sure, let's go. What, got it. Where do I need to? Because I have that bank of trust with them. But at some point in the conversation, it would definitely be, no, what are we doing? Why are we doing it this way? Give me the full picture. And I'm sure, as a young officer, my company commanders were like, just do it. And Fortunately, I had some crusty little warrant officers that were pretty protective of like, no, let's make her understand. Let's develop her.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like the level of engagement, if you will, the level of engagement that you're able to provide or to even access in yourself when you're just told what to do is totally different than when you understand it and you see the vision and you buy into the vision and you know how you can be a part of it. Like it's just a totally different thing that you can provide.
And even when you don't like the decision, right? When you're like,
Yeah.
this is not the decision I would make, but you understand how they got to the decision and
Yeah.
you understand that it is their role and responsibility to make that decision. So it's like, I think people have a hard time understanding that you can hold two truths
Ooh,
at
I like
once.
that. Yeah. Tell me more.
You can be upset and mad at the decision and understand it at the
Mm,
same time. And it's in that understanding that you're able to execute at your highest. If
mm.
you just stay in the mad and I don't like it, then you become almost subversive to the effort. But if you understand, then you can actually engage and move forward.
I think that that kind of nuance is hard for people in general, maybe especially right now.
I think, yes, in our current culture of us versus them,
Yeah.
we've lost operating in that nuance. And I think we've lost operating in the grace. But it is possible. You see it all the time when people can, in their personal, when their family dynamics, like, and but somehow they leave that skill set when they come into something that is uncomfortable and bigger for them.
Mm.
We just came through the holidays, right? Everybody is negotiating the family dinner table. I don't care. I don't care what your family is, or if it's a friend's table or whatever. You're all negotiating, and there are things that, like, I don't like that dish, but gosh, someone spent the time to make that green bean casserole that I don't really like, so I'm going to eat some of it. Right? That's the same principle. It's just on something that we were taught as kids, and then we put it into a bigger, more pressure, and more risky situation, and we forget that principle.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like also the relationships are thinner or like there's not that bank of trust that you talked about. So maybe people aren't as willing to invest into to let there be the nuance or be able to have the capacity for the nuance because they don't have that relationship. Do you see that too?
I do, and I see where supervisors are. This is an age-old problem. It's not anything new. They're very technically competent, amazing in their technical skills, and then they're promoted to a supervisory position, and they really don't have any people experience. And now you're asking them to manage people, and their comfort zone is the technical. Um, so one, they're operating in a very uncomfortable position for them. And then two, all the people that they are supervising, like, it's almost like one strike and you're out. The three-strike rule hasn't actually, it's just so much faster. And so people are making opinions, and holding those so much more quickly. And then the new supervisor has to figure out a way to crawl out of that and reset that. And it's super uncomfortable and hard. And if you're already uncomfortable, you don't want to do it.
Hmm.
I'll just I just have this team that's just hard to manage and I'll just survive. Well, I don't want to go to work in that situation. I don't want to go to work in a team that we're just surviving. I'll go find something else to do because there's opportunity elsewhere now.
Yeah. It's also a good point because I think that we both have noticed a trend for people to be hesitant to step into leadership roles or even to step down from leadership roles. And so that idea of being uncomfortable, not just being uncomfortable, sometimes they just don't want to. There's lots of reasons. Okay, there's lots of reasons. Let's acknowledge that. Sometimes it has to do with pay. Sometimes it has to do with overwhelm and stress and that sort of thing, mental health. But what the capacity to deal with the nuance and the hard things, like that's one of the beauties of the leadership programs that you're leading too, is that they are intentionally put into uncomfortable situations. And you are good at that. You love there's something about you. No, I think it's that you know the value of it. You see the
Right.
value, you know the value, you know how important it is. You see a vision for that person that's beyond where they're at. And so you're willing to kind of poke in the right spot or help them to see the hard things and deal with the hard things instead of just finding some, maybe they're really good at navigating around the hard things so they can keep it easy, and you're like, no, 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 let's face this, you can do this. Yeah.
Yeah, I really believe that I am granted the gift of seeing people beyond what they see themselves, right? I really see people's growth. And it doesn't come quickly. It's a process within the relationship. But everybody has the ability to grow. And that's just what we're asking you. We're just asking the students to grow. And I really am unattached to decisions. Like, fine, that's your decision. That's great. But can you tell me how you got there? Can you not justify it? I'm not asking you to justify, I'm just asking you to explain how you got there. And that's very different too. A lot of people have been asked to justify, and then we all get defensive because we have to justify it. And it's like, no, I'm really curious. And then in that mix, maybe I see a gap, and do I have the permission to explore that gap with you? I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm trying to make sure that your decision is as solid as you can make it in a safe place, because it's going to be challenged. If you are a leader, every decision is going to be challenged. The successful leaders aren't the ones that say, I want everyone to like me. It's not that they want people to dislike them,
Right.
but they are so tied to their vision that they want people to come along, and they are willing to stand in the fire for what they think is right. And sometimes that's exhibited as amazing good, like they're willing to stand in the fire for making sure that no one is laid off and everyone takes a pay cut, right? But you can imagine that even in that example, there would be people that would be annoyed that they had to take a pay cut, right? So even in the good, heartwarming stories, their decision would have been questioned.
Yeah. How do you deal with the fact that you know that you're being questioned or that you know you can't make everybody happy? I mean, I know that not everybody has the same like need for that or feeling like they need that, but how do you cope with that?
Yeah, some days better than others. Um, I mean, it's not that I don't get triggered. When somebody comes up against my core value, like I have a very quick, almost uncontrollable emotional response that I get to clean up afterwards. Like if they trigger me hard enough, it is a fire breathing response right back to them. Um, but I've, I guess I have come to understand that the relationships are far more important. Um, I'm not going to be, I don't have a big circle of friends. I don't need a big circle of friends, but I have a big circle of goodwill. And that goodwill is more important to me than almost anything. So I'm willing to go clean up the mess that I created and own my part. Um, and that didn't come, that came with a lot of messes and a lot of opportunity to clean up. It wasn't, it's a learned behavior. It is not something that I just showed up and got commissioned and got. You know?
Yeah.
But I think my mentors really showed me the value of grace. Like I just keep thinking about some of the great leaders that I had, and they're all very, very different, but they all at some point just looked at me and shook their head and, come on, we can do this, and that's the legacy of, okay, come on, we can do this, you know, and that's, I don't know, I guess I just want to be that person
Mm.
of, you got this, now let's just figure out how you're going to do it.
One thing that I love about that is it's not just I believe in you, but I believe in you and I'm willing to come with you on the ride or help guide you as you go.
Mhm.
Sometimes it
Yeah,
takes a bit of like swallowing one's pride to accept that kind of help or
yeah,
accept that somebody else is willing to do something for you or with you.
yeah. I often wonder how people see leaders. Like, I think if you're not thinking about leadership, um, then people might see a leader that's just out in front, right? That's a superstar doing great and amazing things, and people are following because of their star power, or maybe because of the organizational power. But I think for me, what I've discovered is that leadership actually holds very like different positions based on what's happening. There are definitely times you need to be out in front, setting the vision, setting the intent, showing the way. But then there's times where you need to be walking alongside people going, yeah, this is hard and we're going to figure it out, and being the encourager and listening to your team. And there's lots of good ideas within your team. So not being so far in front of them that you can't hear their ideas. And then there's other times where you really have to be behind them, pushing them. Like, let's get off the starting point and let's go. I'm gonna push you out of the nest. Let's go. you know? Um, and you have to be willing to do all three of those. And sometimes you're doing all three of those to very different people at the same time.
Do you think there's like different degrees of leadership?
I don't know. Tell me what you mean by degrees.
Yeah, like intensity or like amount of responsibility, maybe. Does every person who is a supervisor need to be able to do all those things?
Um,
No?
yeah, I would, if I go back to an Army example, right? The very smallest team that you start learning leadership at is a buddy team. It's you and your battle buddy. It's just two people. And so you learn that dyadic relationship. And there's, you know, yes, one of you is appointed a team leader, but it's a buddy and you can't cross the finish line without your buddy. But I think even in that example, one person is leading, those same three things of leading, walking behind, and pushing still apply. And then as you increase responsibility and your team grows, I would think that all three of those positions are always being used, but it's different based on what your task is. You know, if you're a senior leader in a large organization and you're hosting a town hall, and your intent of the town hall is to set out a new vision, then you're very much leading. But if the intent of your town hall is to say, what's going on? How can I support you? Then, you know, you're very much in the mix. And you can even see that like in the presidential, not the debates necessarily, but the town halls, right? Where they come off the stage and they're down on the platform talking to people. It's very much that idea of let's just have a conversation. And then there are times where that senior leader really has to be pushing his direct reports. Like, I've made the decision. The time for arguing and good ideas is over. Let's start executing. So I don't know if I think that's different. I think the scale of who you influence is different.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned your core value being triggered. I wonder if we could go back to that for a minute. I've not heard it talked about in terms, I mean, other than, you know, when you've talked about it as far as like the core value being triggered. Can you explain what that means to you?
So I can give you kind of the example for me is I have this core value of respect. That doesn't mean that I am always perfect or aligned or respectful, but I really do have this core value of respecting history, respecting the individual, respecting the process, the intent, like all of that is in that. And so when I feel like I'm being disrespected, when I'm in a position of authority, usually, like, and I feel like it's not that you're arguing with me, it's that you're disrespecting me.
There's a difference. I want you can you flesh out that difference?
There is a difference because there's healthy arguments and healthy disagreements, and we can, like, you're not you're not coming at me personally,
There you
right?
go.
You're coming at the idea or the conversation and you're really working through it. But when that flips to a personal thing, and it's not, every one of us has a different thing that pulls it over and triggers it to the personal. But when that happens, it like you can't react as a rational person. And we all have these things. We all have these core values, whether or not we've spent the time to name them. But I will tell people that when you have a significant emotional event that is almost out of control, like, examine that, because you came up as that situation came up against something that you hold so fundamentally true that you can't not react that way, you know.
Yeah, it's almost like neurological. It's not prefrontal cortex kind of
Well,
rational brain thinking. It's boom. Yeah, reactionary. Right. And then it does take some cleaning up of the mess, like you mentioned.
yeah, yeah, and I think leaders have to acknowledge that we're just doing the best we can,
That we're
and I think
human, maybe.
that we're human, right? And I think our teams need to do that as well.
Yeah.
We talk a lot in our programs about the Tuckman cycle, right? Of forming, storming, norming, performing, and then aligning again, adjourning. And I often keep that in mind of like, where are we? Are we just coming together and everyone's really nice? No one wants to, like, create a wave. Everyone's just like, oh, sure, I really like that green bean casserole, even though I can't stand it. Um, Not to my children, I love your green bean casserole. But everyone's just super nice. And then you move into the phase of like, I'm tired of being nice. You have asked me to make the coffee one too many times. I I I don't want to print that report and staple it for you. You're like, whatever. I'm tired of being nice.
Mm.
And that moves into that storming. And a lot of organizations stay there or they dissolve because they're just in that storming. No one's having fun. Nobody sees the vision for getting out of that. They're not tied to the bigger picture. They're just in the mess. And if you can hang in there and negotiate your way out of it as a team, then you can kind of get into performing. You've gone through that hard time and you've forged a different relationship that will pull you forward.
Mm.
And then over time, that could become a very well-oiled, high-performing, high-executing team until one person leaves. And then you have to renegotiate it. It all happens again. Or you're performing, you're zooming along, and somebody decides they don't like the rules that the team has set. So you go back to the storming because you're renegotiating how you're going to play together.
Mm.
So I think that cycle, when people can understand it and they can see where they are, again, it's that story, right? It's giving people a place to understand where they are and what's happening. And it gives leaders, okay, I know we're in this phase. I know I need to pull them out of that phase. Instead of just, oh my God, what's happening? Why is everyone suddenly fighting? What's happening? I'm the worst
What
leader
did I do
ever.
wrong? Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it does help tremendously when people have that vision for, okay, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. They simply need to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that you are not just digging a hole for yourself.
Right. I also would say that it's super important as a leader to go back and go, what happened to get us there? Like, let's don't do that again.
Mm.
In the organizations that we work with, maybe a contract didn't get filled on time, which put extra pressure on the full-time staff because they had to fulfill the role that contract needed to fulfill. So, okay, your team can storm, you can come through it. And then as a leader, your obligation, your responsibility back to your team is to go, we aren't ever not going to have a contract in place again. I don't care what I have to do. We are getting a contract in place.
Mm.
Right? That's the responsibility back to your team.
Yeah. So it's like acknowledging, okay, look, this is what happened. We see what happened. We see that this is also kind of normal in a sense that it's going to happen. There are going to be hard things. We're not going to get everything right, but at the same time that doesn't mean we can't get better.
Right.
We still need to get better through it. So let's expect to not be perfect, but let's keep iterating. Let's keep getting better. I think that's so
Right.
important. It's a
Yep.
mindset that just like, if we could just get everybody to think like that.
For sure. And then actually, use that. Like, I think there are a lot of organizations that go through an event and they'll do an after action or a wrap up or whatever. And then that document or those thoughts just sit in the drive or,
Yeah.
note or wherever they keep it. And they don't actually bring it out and go, oh, we did some great and amazing things. Let's do that again. Or, yeah, we've never wanted to do that again. So, but we're falling into that trap.
Mm.
So it's one thing to do them, it's another thing to actually use them.
Yeah. That's right. Absolutely. So good. Well, we obviously have a lot more to talk about. Um, I have so many other questions before we go this time. Marci, can you tell us the story, or would you be willing to tell us the story about the Bronze Star?
It was not any heroic, great war story, really. It was that the battalion executed the better, faster, cheaper vision over and over and over again. We saved the taxpayer about $10 million in the course of like 5 months. We had another initiative that had never been done before. We were able to issue the first US government contract to an Iraqi businessman to repair our big connexes, our big shipping containers in Iraq versus shipping them all the way down to Kuwait empty and then coming back empty so we could fill them. He then hired Sons of Iraq off the battlefield, and employed them and taught them welding skills. So it was a whole thing of being able to vet them and bring them on the base and give them the skill. And that project was actually still in place 3 years after I left the theater. So that project saved the taxpayer probably about $1 billion.
Wow.
So it wasn't like a big, and I think that's kind of important too in the story of the Army is there are so many heroes that are not typical shoot 'em up, bang bang war fighting stories, right? There's the heroes at the medevac stations, there's the surgeons, there's the trauma centers, there's the everyday guy that does guard and makes sure that we're all protected. There's the DFAC sergeant who makes sure that our meals are out and we're eating well and they're timely and they're hot. And there's all these pieces to make the engine run, and everybody has to do their part. And the opportunity to do great and amazing things when you're just doing your part is always there.
Wow. I mean, and that's such a great example of the importance of having a leadership philosophy about sharing your intent and making sure that people understand it and are on board with the intent, about following through with your intent and what you're saying you're allowing people to do, not just pulling back and saying, "Oh, I didn't want you to do that." Just like allowing it to happen and allowing other people to have a voice, essentially to have the agency to be able to say, okay, so this is the intent. If I can execute it, I'm going to be able to contribute something to this initiative, to this cause, and it adds up to $1 billion and its legacy, and that's huge. Thank you,
Yeah,
Marci, for your
yeah,
service.
of course, of course, yeah. And it, you know, I would go back and serve again. I would if I wasn't so old, I would go back and do it all again. It was a great way to spend a career.
Hmm. One last question for you. What would be your last piece of advice for somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
The courage changes everything. Be courageous. You're not going to get it right. You don't know all the second and third order effects, but just be courageous enough to share what you know to be true.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll do this again.
Okay.
And thank you for everything that you do for, you know, the programs that you run and yeah, for your partnership and stuff too. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.